Christians, make Egypt great again. A little mini series I'm doing on Exodus 1 regarding the new king over Egypt who followed the death of Joseph and the Pharaoh that governed over him. This new king, as I've stated over and over again in the previous messages, was a disruptor. His whole goal was to undo everything that Joseph had done and everything that the previous Pharaoh had done, especially and in particular when it comes to the relationship between the Egyptians and the Israelites. This new king had no love for them and wanted them to be subjugated to strict and harsh tyrannical burdens and the taxes and tribute that attend them. So his mission was to recruit his own people, turn them against the Israelites, and cause them to believe that the Israelites are going to be a problem for their nation. So they had to be dealt with. And so he was successful at getting the Egyptians to turn on the Israelites and to comply with his policy. But when he put his policies in place, which was to intensify their burdens and the rigors of what is nearly slave bondage, all it did was to increase the population of the Israelites, which he was trying to do the exact opposite, to depopulate them. He wanted them out of the position of being able to have growth that could marginalize the difference between the number of Egyptians versus the number of Israelites. He didn't want them to grow in size. He did not want them to have power. He did not want them to have the energy to survive and to thrive. He wanted to break their backs. This is what he wanted to do. To shame them and to humiliate them and to impoverish them. And this was a big part of it. And he did all of this under the guise of getting the Egyptian people to believe that the Israelites, who were shepherds, that they were going to be ones facilitating an insurrection against Egypt in the future. And he wanted to make sure that they did not have the capacity. So what he did was convinced his own people that if we let these people continue to enjoy their livelihoods here, at some point, they're going to overtake us. And they're going to be party to those who would want to overtake us. This was what he was dealing with. And this, I would think, should sound familiar to many of us. But when you read the scriptures and you see what I'm pointing out to you, I need to make no comment. See for yourself what is taking place. When his burdens or his bondage failed at decreasing their numbers, then he goes to two of the Israelite women and tries to get them to work for him to slay their own flesh and blood to benefit him, the king of Egypt, an Egyptian. But those two women, the midwives, the head nurses, wouldn't comply because they feared God. So he goes to them in verse 18. He called them to him. And when they came into his presence, he asked the question, "Why have you done this thing and allowed the male children to live?" Listen to what the women said. The midwives said to Pharaoh, "The reason why we did not destroy the lives of the male children is because the Hebrew women are not like Egyptian women, for they are lively and they give birth before the midwives come to them." So what they're saying is this. They're saying that they're spitting these babies out so fast, we can't get to them fast enough before the babies come out. So what they're dealing with definitely, as we know, precedes what we know of today as abortion. But what this scenario is that takes place, that happens, is that there's this stool or this sort of trough where when the babies come out, they fall into this trough. And the whole idea was for the midwives to slay them while they were there. So this is to slay them immediately at birth, immediately. And they wouldn't do it because they feared God. And this king didn't understand it, but they gave him their explanation. They said, listen, these Hebrew women, they're not like these soft Egyptian women. They're strong. And they spit these babies out, and there's so many, and they can endure so much that it just got away from us, and there's no way for us to be able to accommodate this request. It's just too much. So in verse 19, as I said, they tell him, we can't do it. These women are too strong, too many. So in verse 20, it says, therefore God dealt well with the midwives, and the people multiplied and grew mightily. Now, notice this. The Pharaoh, this new king, he tried strict and harsh burdens, tasks to stifle the growth of Israel. Then he tried to get these two midwives to facilitate slaying all of these boys when they're born. But it seems that no matter what he tries, all it does is result in the Israelites multiplying at a faster rate, going contrary to what his plans were designed to do. And so it says here in verse 20 that because of what these women did, and notice, they lied to Pharaoh. They feared God, but they lied to him in order to preserve life. I'll leave you to deal with the morality around that. But they lied to him in order to facilitate the preservation of life. So in verse 20, therefore God dealt well with the midwives, and the people multiplied and grew mighty. And then it says in verse 21 of Exodus 1, and so it was that because the midwives feared God, he provided households to them. And what this means is not that Pharaoh provided housewives to them, because he would not have been rewarding them for going contrary to his desires, but God provided them households. And what does it mean? It means that God gave them families of their own. God gave them families that grew. God blessed the fruit of their wombs, and he also increased the households for others. But he blessed these housewives because they stood in the gap, they lied to preserve life, and God blessed them for it. He blessed them for it. And in verse 22, it says, so Pharaoh commanded all his people, saying, every son who is born, you shall cast into the river, and every daughter you shall save alive. Now, it's interesting also that this king, he kept looking for new ways to exercise his tyranny. But no matter what he did, it resulted in the opposite effect for which he was trying to make happen. But the key thing here, especially with these women, is that they feared God. It took two of them to fear God. We don't need a whole army to stop a tyrant or an oppressor. You just need a few who are faithful and are willing to do what is right. Just a couple. A couple who fear God. And blessings shall be multiplied. And the people of those who are blessed will continue to multiply. Be provoked and be persuaded.